I didn't realize just how big Fantage was. So for other people like me who perhaps don't know or didn't play Fantage, a good way to get a sense of its scale and size is that it competed with the biggest children's MMO of all time, Club Penguin. And for such a huge game, it actually had very humble and wholesome beginnings. But just because a game starts with good intentions, that doesn't mean that it won't eventually fall into the evil hands of capitalism. Today we're looking into another virtual world from our childhood, and I am not even going to do a big complicated intro for this one because this video is so long and this script took me so long to write, and it's so complicated and so many small pieces going into the history of this site that make it as controversial as it is that I just had to give it its own video. I also just want to give a huge thanks to everyone who I messaged or who reached out to me about Fantage and gave me information. I am really, really grateful, as I always love to have player experience and stories in my MMO videos, as I think it helps flesh out the site and its story. But before we jump on in, I always ask that if you do find yourself enjoying today's video at any point, and because of this script literally deteriorated my sanity, I ask that you consider dropping it a like if you enjoy it, and consider subscribing to join the Otter Den. I make many, many more videos just like this one, and I also play some old games from the 2000s. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, make sure you subscribe, and without further ado, let's get going. Fantage, short for Fantastic Age, was created in 2007 during the virtual world boom and would grow to become an incredibly popular site that reached 6.5 million users in just 2.5 years of running. And as I mentioned, the game is fairly humble and wholesome in its beginnings. From what I can see, there are 4 commonly listed founders of Fantage. The first of which I am not even going to try and pronounce because I know I'm going to offend so many people and completely butcher that name. Peter Bay and David Huang. Although the last two generally seem to be accepted as the 2 main founders. Huang first came up with the idea and reached out to others in the industry. I live in the US and I'm raising my children. In the US, homes are far apart, so I can't go to my friends' houses every day to play with them, or invite them over to my house. So I thought that if there was a world where children could connect with each other on the computer, they would be able to have more fun playing with their friends, and that's what inspired me to create this game. After pulling together a small team, self-funded work began on the site in early 2007 with a budget of $250,000. Although Huang and Bei had a lot of experience in the startup industry and also a lot of knowledge in the gaming industry of the time, they had to go through a few versions of Fantage before it got to the site that we know and love. And initially they actually developed the site as an online math website, which unsurprisingly did not fly very well, and I think we can all infer as to why. They then created a virtual world with built-in games for kids, which tested badly with focus groups, and after this, Fantage finally came to fruition. And from the very beginning, it seems that they had a very clear goal of exactly what they wanted Fantage to be. Fantage aims to differentiate itself through its content and by providing a site that 1. Parents trust and kids love, 2. A site that anyone can enjoy, whether by playing games, chatting or shopping, 3. A site where parents can ask their kids and friends about new ideas and future projects, and 4. A site that understands parents and what they expect of a site that their children spend an hour a day visiting. So the team knew from the beginning that they wanted an entertaining virtual world that won the attention of kids, but also the trust and confidence of the parents of those kids. And I think the main way that they went around getting this vote of confidence from the parents of their players came from their emphasis on the safety and integrity of Fantage as a site. And after learning about that backstory and finishing up the research of it, I genuinely think that the team, especially Huang and Bei, had nothing but good intentions for Fantage as a site and the users that were going to play on it. There is also evidence out there that the creators had more than just financial gain from the production of Fantage, as Peter Bay actually said in an interview that he had true joy in working on Fantage. One of the success factors was that I enjoyed it immensely. I had those days where I just woke up filled with energy. I was very happy to myself. That joy, I wanted to share that joy with my team. I was so happy, rushing to get to the office. Huang has also commented on the positive development of Fantage, quoted in an article by 1 Million by 1 Million blog about Fantage's success. Huang says that looking back, the team was extremely lucky, as even a small detour could have cost a huge amount of time and money. One of the beautiful things about being a game development company is that when the right team is set up, it does not take additional capital to develop new content, says Huang. So it's all very happy and positive things all round for Fantage at the opening of the site. So what went wrong? Before we jump into the timeline of Fantage, I'm going to go into the content of it just so that people who were maybe on the same page as me know what the site was like and what it was actually like to play the game and what content there was. Everything about Fantage as a site will be ringing the nostalgia bells, whether you actually played it or were a part of the kids MMO boom in the 2000s. I myself never actually played Fantage, but I did play a lot of MMOs that were very, very similar, and as it grew in popularity and revenue, the site did have a lot of different moving parts, but in the beginning and initially, it was actually fairly small. Alongside a couple of favorite features and locations, they didn't even have their premium currency, eCoins, in place yet. Fantage's theming has kind of stayed consistent throughout its whole lifetime. It's gone through redesigns, but as a whole, it's stayed very, very similar. It echoes the unanimous branding of internet spaces for young kids of the time. It was bright and colourful with an overarching cartoon style that, in my opinion, kind of echoes Moshi Monsters. And it definitely lends itself to its target audience of 6 to 14-year-olds. As we've seen, the visuals of a site like this can have such a powerful impact on the success or failure of it. For example, in a positive light, it can really help with the safety of a site because you are restricting yourself to such a specific age range. But on the flip side of that, once your player base grows out of that age range, you're going to start losing players. I think the main thing that sets Fantage apart from other big sites at the time, and is personally one of my favorite features of the site, is its avatar design. I think they're also called Fantagians. I really love the pixelated look combined with the chibi style that they had going on. I also love that the avatars just randomly float around on hoverboards instead of walking, and I tried to figure out why this was a thing. I realized that it's because Huang literally just thought it would be cool, so he did it because he could. And surprisingly, it blends really well into the world. I think they work as well as they do because they bring detail and life into a more simpler designed environment. Like when you look at the set for Fantage, the backgrounds have detail, but on the whole, it's fairly simple. And the avatars bring in this like extra piece of detail and busyness and pattern that helps breathe life into them. The world is essentially set on a floating island with a variety of differently themed locations. And when I say variety, I mean variety. There was so many different themed places to go in Fantage, and they were added over its lifetime. It was so big that in a final tour of the world, just before it closed in 2018 by Teapot, it took them a whole hour to speedrun the entire map and go to every single place you could go in Fantage. And this is literally them jumping in and out, not even interacting with anything around them. A lot of these echo real-life locations and seem to encourage role-playing, like the cafe, the school, and the salon, but there was also a nice mix of fantasy areas to really get the imagination going. And whilst there is a really good mix of places that give kids a ton of things to do, there is a lot going on, especially towards the mid stage of the site and middle of its life and onwards. There is so many pop-ups on the screen at this moment in time. My brain just could not comprehend everything that was going on. So in terms of the player's account for the game, when they entered the site, they began by creating a free account, picking an avatar from a variety of presets, and shown their new home, which was in the castle of Fantage, I think. Players also had access to an ID card, which was replaced by the ID phone in 2009. This displayed the player details and could be seen by other Fantagians. It was customizable, you could get different skins for it and have different colors. You could also set what mood you were in and things like that. And it also allowed players to friend each other and become buddies. Exploring the world with other Fantagians and socializing was fun enough, but there also seemed to be a ton of minigames, both educational and recreational, where players could spend their time beating high scores and earning stars. This was the free currency that bought additional items from shops in-game and was available to all players. although members received a monthly allowance. Memberships were featured since the beginning of the game, giving exclusive features and items, costing a monthly subscription of $5.99 per month or $54.99 per year in 2010. This is kind of crazy considering that in the wider context of MMOs, if you compare what you're getting from Fantage in 2010 and what you were getting from Star Stable Online in 2010, you could pay a one-off payment of $60, I think, or £60 for a Star Stable lifetime membership, whereas Fantage was asking for $54 a year. And now in retrospect, I feel like I gave Star Stable a much harder time than it deserved. I kind of mentioned it before, but socializing in Fantage was a really big part of the playing experience. It gave young players a taste of the social networking experience within the safe boundaries of the virtual world. Well, as safe as virtual worlds can get on the internet. As the years went on, this aspect of the game only got bigger as the game openly encouraged socializing and the forming of relationships through game functions like house parties, friendship bracelets, and cooperative farming. To someone outside the genre, it is often assumed that these virtual worlds were full of predators and bullying and were really, really negative spaces that sucked parents' wallets dry. But for most people, and a lot of people who experience sites like this, they were actually really, really positive. One player, Emmanuel Tweak, describes how Fantage was the first time they experienced real-time multiplayer gaming. The big appeal was that you weren't alone and interacted with hundreds of players in real time, something I wasn't accustomed to at that point. As Wang and the team behind Fantage wished, it seemed it was a genuinely good place for children to experience the virtual social world for the first time, in its early stages particularly, as it had the resources and passion to create a positive, entertaining environment for kids, whilst also being educational and safe. As is commonly done in sites like this, the chat system was filtered, which, although not foolproof, did work most of the time. This isn't to say that nothing negative ever happened on Fantage. In fact, it did, and we will talk about it going forward. Especially in its early life, it seems that Fantage was a really positive site, and it seemed to have a very positive community behind it. And boy, did the Fantage community grow huge. There is a ton of content that was made by players of Fantage across many, many different forms. And in fact, Fantage actively encouraged this as they held YouTube music video competitions every so often. But as I mentioned, many took it upon themselves and actually grew social media accounts producing content about Fantage. I was actually able to get in contact with one of these creators, but they spoke about the fact that they wanted to start a Fantage YouTube account for a while as they loved the game and saw other people making content just like it, and actually then went on to make them with their friend, which I think is just so wholesome and lovely. It even got to the point where Fantage creators were making full-on TV series with 10 plus episodes on YouTube that followed a storyline and everything. And a lot of these are still public on YouTube, and there is tons and tons of blogs that were obviously discontinued because of how the site ended up. So Fantage had been received incredibly well by its US audience, and it had grown humongous. So obviously, as it would go, it wasn't long before others caught wind of its success. As Fantage grew more and more popular, as most companies do, it decided to expand its entities beyond their original market. In Fantage's case, they released a series of apps from 2011 onwards and were available up until its closure. It seems all of them were themed around or took directly from the Fantage site, like Fantage Bullseye and Fantage Fish Fish, which took the minigames under the same name from the site and made them standalone apps. Interestingly, they also released an extension of the Fantage world called Fantage Comet, which, according to Fantage lore, is a cosmic turtlefish creature which brought the original Fantagian settlers to the floating island that we know Fantage to be set on. I'm not sure if you could access the Fantage Comet through a PC or a desktop. I don't think you could. I think the only way you could access it was through a iPod or an iPad. They also gave limited content on there and items, which I know is why a lot of people went to it. And also, can we just talk about the lore of that for a hot sec? Because what are the Fantagians? Are they aliens? Are they monsters? Are they humans that have come from Earth and have been plopped down onto this new site. With the expansion of the site, the team also introduced e-coins in 2010, a new type of currency, according to the Fantage wiki, that enabled non-members to access premium items, and premium members can keep their items after their membership expires. This was generally received quite well by players as it expanded the in-game economy and gave access to more items. At the time of release, 10,000 e-coins was $10, which could get you a decent amount of average items. This also didn't devalue memberships, as obviously, as with most sites, members got double the amount of e-coins with each purchase. The new shop, which was released in December of the same year, Vintage Classics, was probably a way to entice players to buy these, as you could get clothing, hair, and like pets and stuff that had been discontinued and weren't sold in the shops anymore. Around this time, Fantage received investment from Nexon, a huge South Korean game development company that has helped develop titles like MapleStory, The Finals, and Mabinogi. In 2009 and 2010, Fantage received strategic investments from a large game company to expand vertically and horizontally, and is not seeking any more funding at this time. These investments will be enough for Fantage to achieve its short and long-term goals. And this did in fact enable the site to achieve their short-term goals at least, developing new game systems which would become fan favorites, like the Pets, released in July 2010, which closely resembles the same system that Moshi Monsters had with their Moshlings. Each pet belonged to a family, and I think there was 4 in each thing. Very, very, very similar to the Moshlings. Overall, I do think that Moshi Monsters was a little bit better designed and thought out in terms of like the way that they look, but I can appreciate what they did. Fantage also began running charity events like the December 2010 one, which encouraged players to donate stars so hospitalized children could receive gifts over the Christmas period. The biggest thing this gave opportunity for, though, was something on a whole new level. Nexon was licensed to release the game to new audiences in both Japan and Europe, the first of which was released for Japan in February of 2010. This Japan release was huge and is a really, really big part of Fantage's lore and past. And as big as this new version of the game was, it was a short-lived progression for Fantage as it lasted less than a year. This version was essentially completely owned by Nexon, and signing up required players to have a Nexon account and use their currency in order to buy items in-game. In terms of the actual game itself, it was essentially the same but with a few changes made to suit the new audience. Some of these were localization alterations, some huge like the changing of the name to Assureland Fantage and the removal of paid membership. They also thought about limiting the amount of money Japanese players could spend, as according to an interview with Huang, the problem of children spending too much money on free mobile sites has become a social issue, which I didn't realize. I feel like I kind of knew and had read about it before, but I didn't realize it was such a big issue that gaming companies were having to implement restrictions. For players, there was also unique cosmetic items like 2 blue eye sets, which for some reason were really, really popular, and due to its popularity in other games, Nexon also added a gacha element, which I assume was intended to replace the income that would have come from memberships. No one but the Fantage Japan team can be completely sure as to why the site failed as hard as it did. The Nexon announcement page for the Fantage Japan game is inaccessible, and there's nothing out there that develops beyond this. There is a rumor that Fantage Japan was being used by US players who wanted access to rare items, so they began making numerous accounts which were essentially bot accounts that weren't used in a way that kept the game alive. This and the language barrier that allowed inappropriate phrases and words in English to slip through the safety precautions probably aided in its early demise. As this user reports, I remember being in a super dead server with maybe 3 to 4 people in the main hub and they were all cussing or something. So yeah, the site essentially closed later that year. I can't remember the specific date now, but I'll put it on screen, which ended up being less than a year, which is pretty nuts, and the stuff that was going on with the site must have been quite extreme for them to close it this early on. The European version of the game had a similar lifetime to the Japanese version, just a little longer, closing in July 2011, although it remained open in France and Germany for a little bit longer. And I think in terms of business ventures, as someone who's not in the business world, I can safely assume that this was a huge flop, especially for a site that had so much promise and success in the US. According to tvtropes.org, the game is generally separated into 2 eras, the old Fantage and the new Fantage. The page classes New Fantage as of 2013 and onwards. I think New Fantage really began after the failure of the other game releases, as the devs realized that they had to find a different way to increase the profit that they were making for Fantage without expanding it beyond the US. And I think this then triggered the aforementioned introduction of Trade and Sell in October of 2012. Trade and Sell is a notoriously interesting time in Fantage's history. The devs introduced this new selling mechanic as a way for players to sell or trade unwanted items to earn e-coins and stars. It seems they put a little too much trust in players to use this correctly. Trade and Sell was full of scams and abuse of the features that the shop provided. As Dilettante's article comments, during this time period of Trade and Sell, the value of stars rapidly inflated, suggesting that this was done on purpose to get more users to purchase e-coins. But it was also possible for e-coins to drop in value as well. This suggests that Fantage's sales revenue dropped big time after users gained e-coins and stars with ease in Trade and Sell, so their solution may have been to inflate the value of stars in a last-ditch attempt to push users into buying the slightly more valuable alternative currency e-coins. Either way, this was not a favourable long-term solution for the in-game economy. There's also a rumour that admins on the site were buying items for the max price of 9,999,999 e-coins, but there is no tangible evidence to support this as of yet. Other than the inflating economy, players also got scammed by other players as well, as sellers would promise additional items known as double trading. It got so bad that Fantage actually put out an official post warning players of scammers. The Trade and Sell mechanic was then closed in November of 2013, and despite the negative occurrences of Trade and Sell, it was a favourite feature of the site for many players. And so many people cried for its comeback on Facebook and other social media sites and in the game. Now, the player that I spoke to that I mentioned earlier, named Emmanuel Tweak, actually mentioned in their messages about how the consumerist side of Fantage became more apparent the older the site got. A few years in, I discovered the most addicting side of the monetary system. I never spent a dime on the game, but would find ways to sell, trade, or simply earn rarer apparel to exchange with other users, which I assume is probably most likely referring to Trade and Sell. I feel like it was probably a way for players to feel like they were getting the membership experience without having to pay for the membership. In 2013, I do think that Kwang sort of saw the red flags and decided to leave Fantage as CEO. As the initial founder and creator, this potentially signals a big shift as someone new takes up the helm. We also know that as early as 2010, Fantage was partially acquired by another company. According to Bay in a podcast with Alchemist X, they sold Fantage to a large gaming conglomerate from Korea, which I'm assuming is the partial selling of Fantage to Nexon, as Nexon, by the end of Fantage's lifetime, had a 58.7% share of Fantage's company. And given what acquisitions and selling of sites has done to other MMOs, I think we can infer that this was probably the start of the end for Fantage. So not only were they attempting to run Fantage just as a site in general, they were trying to expand the site beyond what it was already and add new elements. They had a change in management, the CEO left, who was one of the initial founders. They were also trying to fix the fallout of Trade and Sell and how that completely rocked the economy of the game. They were also in a huge amount of debt. And how do you think that they were planning to deal with this? So that debt that we spoke about would materialize in the choices that we see Fantage make as a company going forward in the next couple of years. And it's really here where everything starts going downhill. Looking at employee reviews, it's apparent that there was a huge problem with the company itself. When these Glassdoor reviews were found, it was a pretty big deal, and actual players began to see the reality of who was behind their favourite game. The company of Fantage has an overall rating of 2.4 out of 5 on reviews, with the only overly positive reviews being made like post-2020, which I feel like was probably made by someone who played the game. And the only other positive aspects of reviews that are seen by real employees is the co-workers that they worked with, or some of the benefits that came with the job. Not that there was many, because many of the reviews state that the pay was really low for the work required, or that the amount of sick days offered was inhumane. but the main point that is nearly always mentioned in every single review is that the management was awful. As early as 2011, the problems of micromanaging, toxicity, repressing joy, overworking, and lack of respect for staff were already present. And if that's left to fester and continue in any sort of business or company environment, we all know where that's going to lead and what sort of impact that almost always has on the product itself. Some deadlines and important things slipped underneath the to-do list and radar. This is probably why in 2014, a complaint was raised against Fantage as they didn't renew their safe harbor certification, which meant that they were wrongly presenting as holding these certifications. The US-EU safe harbor allowed US companies to transfer consumer data to Europe safely within EU laws. I'm assuming this applied to their French and German sites that they were running. I don't think they were still running at this time, so I'm going to assume that they weren't actually doing anything which required them to have this certification for them to do it. But the fact that they were wrongly presenting as having the certification was enough for a complaint to be raised against them. All of the stuff that went on with this case is available online, down to like the court proceedings and what happened, and basically Fantage settled and they got a slap on the wrist. In the fallout of Trade and Sell being removed and the refunds being made, they introduced a new feature to replace this called My Mall. This was a safer way to sell items. A third and final currency was also introduced with this called gold. Now, gold was only obtainable by purchasing with real money. It was not able to be earned or gained in any way for free in the game. You had to buy this with your own money, and it was the only way to get it. And as many people online and ex-Fantagians mention, this was a very, very bad idea. As Tweak mentions, there seems to have been a superiority complex on Fantage as a site. And I do also think that this is not unique to Fantage at all, as it is a common thing that happens on any MMO that features a tier or membership system that differentiates those who pay and those who don't. However, I do think that gold exacerbated this extremely by only existing to earn players more gold. It's literally the game version of the rich get richer, the poor stay poor, or the poor get poorer. Like, it's literally that happening in the microcosm of Fantage. And again, this is not a thing that is unique to Fantage alone. This happened across many, many MMOs, and it really, really like infuriates me and makes me cross that they do these like snaky selling tactics to get people to spend more money when they don't want to. Along with the introduction of gold and its many, many variables that made it disgusting, they also made it so that the new Trade and Sell, My Mall, was only accessible by buying kiosks with gold. And as you can imagine, this alienated so many players from accessing a wildly popular and loved feature of the game. With the new version of Trade and Sell, My Mall, you are stopping so many people from experiencing that. And I can imagine, and from what it seems online, people were really, really mad. I feel like the whole vibe and feel of the site as a whole had just kind of shifted by this point into something that was more of like a negative energy and atmosphere where people were just cross at the people who could pay. People who were paying were feeling that they were superior to the people who couldn't afford memberships or gold. You then welcome a demographic that perhaps the game wasn't intended to begin with, which just makes that spiraling happen so much quicker and so much more violently. There was a shift in player demographic and attitude, which I don't think happened overnight, but was probably more of a gradual thing that was increased tenfold by the increase of gold and the anger that caused and the frustration that players had to do with that. I think it all sort of combined and just made Fantage a not very nice place to be anymore. At this point as well, Fantage had been going for around 5 years. And when you think about the initial demographic and target audience, it was 6 to 10 year olds or something like that. And as much as Fantage grew a lot in that time, people and children also grow a lot in that time. If you started playing Fantage when you were 9, By this point, you are now 14 years old, and a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old are very, very different. They are so different in terms of the things they enjoy doing, the way that they communicate, the hobbies they have, the way they choose to spend their time, their vocabulary, their knowledge. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that the site ran on Flash, which obviously probably would have been better for the site to run on its own application. As we know now in retrospect, Flash was not very well known for its stability and security. This combined with the new player base and player demographic that was interacting with Fantage on a daily basis left the site open to bouts of negative experiences and interactions. The Tante article comments on this perfectly. The rise in hacking and scamming along with cyberbullying can be arguably attributed to changing moral attitudes online as the player base expanded since some people of differing backgrounds joined. Some cyberbullying examples, including racism, homophobia, and the endless nons versus mems classism, arguably grew with the changing moral attitudes of online overall. And just to add another cherry on top of this steaming pile, Fantage suffered a DDoS attack in July of 2015. Basically, people ended up thinking that the site had shut down because no one could access it, and Fantage had to go into damage control and let people know that the site wasn't closing and get whoever it was that had managed to crack into the system out of the system. The site was literally sold off by Nexon. I'm not sure when. Let me have a look. I can't remember. Sold in April 2017. Yes. Okay. Oh, no. That's the wrong... Yes, that's the right one. From what I can see from my research, the site was actually sold in April of 2017, which I think was the real beginning of the end. I think basically the people and Nexon wanted to get as much money out of Fantage as they could before it officially hit rock bottom, and because they were in so much debt, I think they tried to find an exit before it became literally worthless, you know? Despite Nexon's best efforts and a string of controversies which left the site quite plainly in such a crap position, Fantage was not to be saved, and it was common knowledge among employees that the company was on its way out as early as 2016. Peter Bay also began work on a new project in 2016, and obviously he was one of the initial founders. I'm not sure if he left the company as a whole in 2016. I think it just really pushed the player base away, and only the truly devoted fan base stayed around to enjoy and engage with the site. The public announcement of its closure was put out in May of 2018. After several wonderful years of service, www.fantage.com will be permanently closed on June 30th, 2018. We would like to encourage our Fantagians to continue playing and enjoying the website, as our services will remain open until the closing date. Our payment page and mobile apps have been closed. All recurring subscriptions have already been cancelled for your convenience. Thank you to all of you across the world who have loved and supported Fantage. I feel like as much as this was upsetting for the fanbase and the players who still actively use the site, it probably wasn't a huge shock, but this doesn't take away from how upsetting it was that so many people were going to be losing a virtual world that they had invested so much time and potentially money into. As with many beloved virtual worlds that we have discussed, there was many a petition to try and save it and bring the game back. People even tried to create a private server not long after the announcement of the closure named Fantage Legacy. This was kind of similar to the Club Penguin Unwritten game, which I myself actually signed up for, and they sold my email address and phone number to someone, and I now get scam calls and scam emails all the time. But the team behind the official Fantage, they immediately jumped into shutdown mode and completely cancelled this private server right from its roots. I feel like the blog that mentioned it made it seem more intense than it actually was, but actually they just emailed them and were like, hey, we don't want you using our stuff, so can you not? If you do, we will proceed with how we think is appropriate. And which I think is fair. As much as people want to save their site, the site literally hadn't ended yet. At least wait a little bit and maybe not be so public about it before the site has even had a chance to close and the companies had a chance to dissolve. In the final minutes of Fantage's existence, which was actually captured by this creator, players gathered in the main downtown plaza of the Fantage map to join together and I guess celebrate the end of Fantage's life. There was lots of people ranting about the fact that the site was closing and being mad about it, saying goodbye to the site. Big emotional tributes were being poured out by players left, right, and center. Until the clock hit a specific time, the site refreshed and Fantage could be accessed no more and was never to return. Until... Even though the Fantage Legacy project was completely shut down by the current team behind the real Fantage, the creators of the Fantage Legacy private server pursued an unnamed project labeled as Plan Z. This would later become Pixel Park. This was a close remake of Fantage and launched as a public beta, accessible after donating $10 to the project in November of 2019, which on the whole I think is fair if you're actually going to do progress on the site and actually put work into it, as nothing actually happened. The site was very, very bare bones when the beta was released. You couldn't change outfits, you couldn't access a lot of places, you could literally only walk around. I don't even think you could type at this point, I think you could just walk around the map. Basically, I think the developer ran out of motivation, took the money, and now is labeled as a scammer who just wanted people's money, when I imagine it was someone who probably did want to make Fantage, they just couldn't be asked anymore. There was another project called Mirai, which was a small group of teens who planned to recreate a Fantage site, which, well, they wanted to create a site that was inspired by Fantage, which was meant to be the beginning of the recreation of many, many favorite MMOs from people's childhood. They made one blog post and then did nothing else. So I'm going to assume that project has been cancelled and is no longer running. Their socials have also been deleted, so it's not like they're on a break or anything. I think it's definitely been cancelled. There is not one, but two, but also a third site, which is called Starry Mew. It's a very, very, very close copy of Fantage and is still running. It seems to be popular enough. A lot of people talk about it on the Fantage Reddit and discuss why the site is so dead and seems to not be doing very well, which I think is kind of a curse which comes with these remakes of beloved sites from our childhood. Unless you were fully engaged, playing this site every single day, putting a load of money to it, it was your second life, pun not intended, you're not gonna spend a lot of time on this. With Club Penguin Unwritten, me and my friends in uni would play it for an hour or two after our lectures and stuff, and then we'd never touch it again, which I think is something which happens with a lot of these remakes. They expect it to be this huge, crazy thing which blows up as much or even more than the original site because people just love it so much and want it back. Whereas in reality, people actually get that nostalgia hit. The pleasure or joy from having that sort of runs out, and then they just don't play it anymore. And that is pretty much it for the history of Fantage. I can imagine I've probably left out something somewhere, and I've probably made a couple of mistakes somewhere about something. Feel free to correct me in the comments below, although I only invite these corrections out of kindness. On my Star Stable Online video, I received some quite negative and rude comments about some small errors that I had made and already spoken about in the comments, in a community post, and there was just no need for them. So if you are going to correct me, please make sure it's polite and out of kindness. Yeah, I'm so happy this video is filmed because this script was so hard to research and so hard to write. If you did enjoy it, please drop it a like so I know that my struggle with this video was or is appreciated. And consider subscribing to see many, many more videos just like this one. As I mentioned, I am looking to cover Line Play and Chit Chat City going forward. If you fancy watching that, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on it in the future. Thank you so, so much for watching. Hydrate to stay great, get your daily calorie intake, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.